Okay, we're live.
So good morning, everyone. For anyone that didn't see, Santi, who has been leading the legal working group for as long as I've been around, is going to take a little bit of time. And so in the interim, I will go ahead and lead the meeting. And the agenda today is relatively simple. There's just a couple of documents and a couple of roadmap issues for us to deal with in the coming weeks. So nothing should be too difficult. And then we'll be back in a couple of weeks to start finalizing some documents. So the last major thing we had, I'm going to share my screen here, was the augmented bonding curve terms and conditions. We finished hacking this last week. Scroll up to the top here. So these are the terms and conditions, and we finished the hack last week. There are a few highlights still, but these are all going to be filled in as the parameters are chosen. And the params parties, I'm pretty sure, are in full effect right now. So we have a fair amount of links in this, but otherwise, once the parameters are chosen, we're going to be able to finalize the document. So everyone that had suggestions, edits, comments, super appreciated. Pretty much everything was incorporated. If you had any edits, it ended up in here with very few exceptions. In fact, I think that is it for the highlights in here. I don't mean to scroll too fast here, but I'm just looking for the highlights. That's it. I do wish we weren't dealing with 14-page documents in DAOs, but all things considered, it is kind of par for the course. I'm going to take that document down. For today, the two documents I want us to at least look at, and then we can edit between now and the next legal group meeting, is going to be just a short document on the terms and standards we use when interacting with third-party documents, or third-party applications, more specifically. So here we can see, as usual, in almost every document I've had anything to do with, I usually let everyone know that the community can come along and change these terms as they wish. And but otherwise, what I try to do here is just let everyone know the types of third-party applications TEC uses. It's not an exhaustive list. It's not meant to be, but people can add to it if they want to. But Discord, the forum, Twitter, I guess you could probably even argue that, Gitbook and even Google Sheets should be in there. But in the future, new documents or third-party applications will come around, or even some may leave. But in any event, the standards that are kind of set here are meant to apply to everything. And one is just sort of describing that TEC doesn't really have control over third-party applications, and we can't dictate the terms of service that any third-party application may have. Nevertheless, though, full governance standards apply, which means gravity and any escalated steps taken by the community for violations of the community standards applies as well to the third-party applications as it does to anywhere else, which I don't think would be surprising to anyone. And then this is sort of this last couple of paragraphs, I think, is where the need for this document arose from, which is what happens if the community. So obviously they can do that at any time they want to. But then the issue arises, well, what happens with anything they've done on the third-party applications? So short of a community member being an admin for purposes like Twitter or YouTube, where it's relatively easy to go in, any other admin can go in and make changes. A lot of the third-party applications we use, to my knowledge, don't give us the ability to delete things. But in any event, I think it should be the community member that's disengaging that should make that decision. So if they want to go through and basically scrub everything they've done in Discord, they're welcome to do so. If they want to go into their own Twitter account that's engaged with, say, the TEC Twitter account, they're welcome to go in and scrub any comments they've made and kind of take down that content. And I just let everyone know that, you know, the TEC community may not have that ability. It depends on the platform. So really, if the disengaging member wants to remove stuff, it's on them to go and remove stuff. I will, after today's meeting, which I don't think will go that long, I will post this into the legal working group Discord, and anyone is welcome to make edits to it. And I do have a highlight there that I will get filled in. And people can make any changes they want. And then hopefully come the next working group meeting, we'll be able to finalize the document and then move it into the Git book. The other, go ahead.
Sorry, a quick question. Do third-party applications also include those voting tools that we use, like a snapshot?
Yeah, I guess the question there would be yes, especially to the extent that a community member can make any kind of additions or comments or engage basically on that platform. And that doesn't just mean, you know, someone that gets onboarded. That means someone that onboards. And I think, and this is something we may want to think about in terms of the document, is what happens if, you know, it's someone that does the onboarding that wants to disengage from the community and they want to, you know, remove content that they've contributed. I think we may want to make a distinction between content that looks like comments on Discord versus I drafted a document that the community uses, right? Like if I want to pick up and leave TEC and I want to scrub, you know, the Discord of any of my comments, you know, I'm probably allowed to go ahead and go through and do that. I don't know if that's a great idea, but I could probably go through and do that. But the documents I created for TEC, to the extent they're being used by the community, is potentially a different matter. So I think with that document, that's the big thing I need to think about, and anyone editing it needs to think about, is how to make that distinction between content that's been provided by community members that is more akin to comments versus content created by community members that is used by the TEC. Like, I don't know if I should just go ahead and say, look, I created the, you know, the bonding curve terms and conditions, right? With help from other people, with edits from other people, with contributions from other people. And if tomorrow I decide I want to leave, should I be able to take that document with me? Or does it in fact kind of at that point that belong to the TEC? The answer may be, yeah, it belongs to the TEC, but if so, we need to make that distinction, you know, a little clearer in that document. So it's definitely a jumping off point. And when I post it in Discord, I will definitely point out that stuff. And then Ivy, if there's anything, you know, snapshot, you know, token log, I imagine, I'm pretty sure you can leave comments on. But any contributions anyone has to help make it clearer would be appreciated.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
The other document I wanted everyone to take a look at today, and again, this is even more of a sort of jumping off point, is Treasury concerns. This, although it's called Treasury concerns, there is nothing concerning about the Treasury at present, to my knowledge. Rather, this is just a beginning of an outline for what, if anything, the community should do about its Treasury. And so I start off with just kind of three notes. One being that some of the stuff that I raise here, it's partly a technical issue, it's partly a legal issue. And I don't want anyone contributing to the document to get tied up in I don't know if it belongs here because it's more technical than legal. I think it's easier if people have any comments about this document to go ahead and just make the comment or make the edit, and we can down the road deal with that. Because there are some aspects of how conviction voting works in the DAO that affects how the Treasury management may be able to work. That's a technical issue. But I don't think it should stop us from thinking about, oh, that may mean we have to create a sub DAO to the extent that we take any of the Treasury and convert it to other cryptocurrencies in order to earn interest. Go ahead.
But wouldn't this be types of questions you would take to the DAO? Like even that first, I can't see the whole document, but it's like, can TEC DAO hold token besides TEC? I mean, would that be something the community would have to decide?
So that's exactly right.
Like
100% correct. It will be something they decide. And all I want to do is have something in place so that if they decide to make that decision, there's a jumping off point on how to handle it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Because if they say, let's go all in on SHIB token, I mean, then, there's an operational maybe ease to do that because it's another vault. But I mean, the legal question is, do people have this sort of expectation of how that pool's being managed? Because ultimately they have a claim to the pool, right? And it's, what is that claim?
Correct. I know. I think that's all correct. It's very possible the community gets a proposal that says we should take 20% of the Treasury that's currently in the tech token, convert it to XDAI, and then put the XDAI on, say, Agave, and lend it on Agave. Entirely possible they do that. Or they may look at the Treasury and go, you know what? We don't want to do anything with it. We're aware of the benefits of diversifying the Treasury. We're aware of the risks of diversifying the Treasury, and we're choosing not to. I would like there to be a framework in place for the community to at least have a jumping off point before making those decisions. And then they can change that frame point. Because again, this is literally just beginning thoughts on this. It is not the rules. Rather, it's when it comes time for the community to start thinking about this. And conceivably, it could have been like, we could have done a proposal right now, right? I mean, it could have been a param for the hash to diversify the Treasury. And I think the general consensus has been, let's get through the params first before we start worrying about it. But then once it really does go live and there's a community of people, there may be a more intense, I don't mean that in a bad way, more intense discussion about what to do with the Treasury. Because conceivably there's even insurance issues, right? I mean, a lot of DAOs are now even taking out insurance in order to protect against any losses. So it's just something I want people thinking about, but it is not the rules. It just isn't that at this point. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so moving down.
Totally. I think it's also good just to remind community members what is sort of best practice. I mean, if you're going to make an analogy to an LLC, what are the finance departments of LLCs generally doing with cash on hand for those LLCs? Can we learn from that analogy, and can we Because even when you bring something to the community, I'm seeing this in the params discussion, but is everyone capacitated to really understand those financial decisions? And if not, can we think of ways to sort of elucidate both financial and potentially legal risks that may be entailed? Because, so it's a fully competent community vote.
Decision.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, actually the economist just died. But Professor Downs, who just passed away, one of his big contributions to economics and political thought was, why do some people who vote kind of remain strategically ignorant of what's going on? And I think that's something DAOs are going to have to contend with, is a certain amount of, how do we make sure community members understand the choice that's being made? Which is not to say that everyone agrees on everything, but it's more of does everyone at least, get on the same page before kind of major issues? And look, we want to do a vote on what the, TEC mascot should be. Should it be a Chihuahua or some other dog meme, or should it be a cat meme? And I think that's a really fun discussion that people would probably get really into. But I think it's really different from one that carries potential liability. We're going to take the 75% of the Treasury and put it into Shiba, right? Which is a really, really risky take.
Yeah, I mean, you're from
carries with it.
California, right? Or live in California at the moment. So land of direct plebiscites. I mean, it's also about how those are written, I think is another question that I always wonder when I read some of the proposals that have come forth so far, is how we're articulating that. And are we loading those questions in a way that sort of, how are we taking due diligence to be as neutral as possible and informative as possible? I think what would be best practice, in my opinion, DAOs, is that we at least strive for that. And we have some, basis upon which we approach all of those questions, so that we make sure that we're not allowing the drafters to bias by their own views. And then also that we provide the adequate information for the community to make an informed decision.
It's, I mean, I don't know how you would ever enforce this, and I don't know how you would ever do it on any scale. But to me, I would love it if sort of an opponent of a proposal is the one that actually writes the proposal. In part because by the very nature that they're not in favor of the proposal, forcing them to write it at least has the potential that they're going to be more accurate about it. Now, of course, they're going to bring their own biases to it, so it's not perfect.
Yeah.
But in a way, I think you're exactly right, because when drafters of proposals, who presumably are in favor of the proposal, are drafting it, they can omit certain things. They can, I mean, just the way any lawyer kind of takes, their good facts and puts them at the front, and then finds a way to either ignore bad facts or bury bad facts. Or my favorite, I like to put bad facts in a really long run-on sentence and hope that no one, that it just doesn't resonate the same way.
Poor grammar obfuscates the poor facts.
Yeah. And, I'll write my best facts in really short, concise, snappy sentences. And my bad facts will be in a really long run-on sentence. And the idea
now, but yeah.
I am. But after 17 years, if people don't realize I'm doing that, they don't care about my writing. Yeah. And that the same thing happens in proposals, right? I mean, it's not even a legal issue. It's just it's a rhetorical device that people use when they're doing something. And so, I see that with the memes too. People use memes as a way of sort of clouding up whether or not something's a good idea or a bad idea. Because when you're stuck, you just put the meme back in.
Yeah. I mean, I do think there should be some level of I mean, I do think, I mean, if you're going to make this sort of guidance, however you're calling it, the Treasury concerns, or some sort of at least maybe guidance to approaching this, because this could be sort of a guidance document in how you do allow proposals to come on the board that are touching on Treasury or opening up liability risks. I mean, I do think there would be something to someone making a proposal with purely like fraudulent claims. Like we should move our treasury into SHIB and there's absolutely no risk in doing so, right? For example,
Right.
I mean, that could be willful.
Right.
That's willfully if you're not, you're fully ignorant to the risks of that, or you're just, which I think would be like willfully reckless, or just,
Yeah.
something you're just trying to run the rug over people.
No,
There
absolutely.
should be a mechanism to, immediate like flag that somehow, or at least reference a guidance document that, accuracy, truth. I mean, just the basic outlines of at least the principles upon which we, neutrality, and so at least you have some basis to say, well, are you actually, doing this in good faith, or are you
Oh,
just making
absolutely.
proposals that are completely self-serving and you're trying to run a fast one, and you're absolutely having inaccurate misinformation there. So
Yeah, and the hope is that we build in sort of multiple redundancies here in the organization of the DAO that protects against that. So, one way is, in theory, a proposal can't go live unless it's talked about in the forums first, right? So that would be a soft.
That's a cool redundancy. Or you could have a drafting committee, which is like anyone who wants to make a proposal has to vet the language with the sort of the language, not just the
Right.
the idea can be, you can come up with whatever idea you want, but it sort of has to like the drafting of that so that have a consistent language. It's also like,
Right.
we should have good, clear language, right? It shouldn't be
Right.
legalese, and not everyone in the community is native English speakers, so it's also should
Right.
try to not use too high level of English while not missing major details, those types of
Correct.
things.
No, absolutely. And then in theory, you still have Celeste in the background, right? Because then if you have a proposal that's, hey, we should put the entire treasury in Shiba, and it's going to be awesome, and there's no risk, then someone that recognizes there is risk, right? You, me, whoever, sits there and disputes that proposal, assuming we're even aware it's happening, right? Because again, that kind of goes back to the political ignorance issue. But there's another redundancy kind of built in where the community, even if the proposal gets close to passing and is about to pass and passes in that time frame before going into action, there's still the ability to make a higher level complaint than just using gravity, because in this case, Celeste would be the straight up arbitration of that claim.
Yeah.
So
Although, but just to, because I've been meaning to jump deeper into Celeste. I mean, I did a little cursory review, but I mean, can you jump in like that while the vote's taking and sort of ask Celeste for like some sort of injunctive relief, or is the timing of Celeste such that you wouldn't actually have any resolution before, like, we haven't even made the parameters yet, how long we have votes for. But I mean,
no, Celeste doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't work that way, right? That's my understanding. It's a pretty fixed system, right?
Clarios, which I think is the other big one, and Aragon, none of them have in the middle of the vote, they can get involved. But what they all use and what they say that everyone should do is there needs to be a period between when the vote ends and when the vote goes into effect.
Yeah,
right?
But even that, you're looking at these in the params. I mean, they're making quick executions.
Correct, and so you want enough room there
to go through the whole procedures of Celeste, because the procedures are longer. I mean, maybe it's something to bring up in the params that
it
does slow things
and so
down,
once Celeste is done, a proposal can't go forward. Like even if the execution in the params is, if a vote passes, it goes live in 3 days.
Yeah.
If Celeste is done, Celeste doesn't have to be resolved in 3 days.
You mean if it's triggered? Like if it's triggered, then you should stop.
It stops.
That would be good to just make sure that's clear. That seems very fair. Then you can have because there is a benefit, of course, to having like, 48 hours, 36 hours, turnaround time if nothing's disputed and everyone's fine
Right.
with it. So you have agility, but you want to balance that against, some protective measures. Yeah, no, that
Yeah.
seems totally fair.
And so that's not quite an injunction, right? But
Yeah,
it almost is, right? Like it's almost like it.
Well, it is basically.
Well, I mean, it's not a preliminary injunction, right? Because it's not an
Yeah,
injunction
it's
happening
like
before the vote
stop.
happens. It's like an execution injunction, I guess is the best way to describe it.
I mean, it's a fast. I mean, the
Um,
idea is they're also a fast adjudicative system, so they don't drag out for years either. You don't use it, and if you
in
do
theory,
less in bad
in
faith, you're
theory,
also sort of open to graduated sanctions as well. You're
correct.
sort of
And you're open to, obviously losing, what you had to put in to dispute it. And you can
yeah,
keep disputing, right? I mean, you can keep running it up the flag and bringing more people involved into the
yeah,
ecosystem.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, all those things happen. All right.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that seems like pretty good.
I think I've been saying it a few times because in one hive they took, like, someone literally on purpose did a bad vote, right? Like a vote in bad faith, and as a test, like they weren't trying to be sneaky, and and they ran the Celeste, and then the judges voted, and no one disputed the ruling, and then that was it, and so that proposal died. But I haven't yet seen in a DAO some real major fights yet. I'm sure they've happened. I just am not aware of them. And so I don't know what happens when in the real world. I know how it works in theory, but in an actual DAO environment where people fight over proposal, especially one that's on the margins, that's going to elicit a lot of kind of intense debate. How it ends up playing out, we just haven't seen it yet. All right, so I'm just going to run through this document, and then I imagine by the quarter hour, we'll probably call it a week. So we start with initial issues. Can the tech DAO hold coins besides TEC? This is somewhat technical, but because of conviction voting and the way the smart contract is currently done for conviction voting, I don't think the answer is yes. I think the answer is no. But we'll work with people as we kind of have these discussions further. If a sub-DAO is needed, then we would have to talk about how that sub-DAO is maintained and controlled, and how it comes into being. And again, this is partly also a technical issue, but also legal, because we want to make sure the same rules are going to apply to any sub-DAO that comes into existence, as well as they apply to the general TEC DAO. So, one of the things that's in the covenant is that some decisions are subject to disputable voting, while some are not. And so that decision, I think, probably needs to be made by the community as well. When we're talking about Treasury issues, do we need a system that is the standard vote when it comes to Treasury, which is people can dispute it and we can fight and it can drag out? Or do you want decisions that are made where the proposal is done and there's just a vote and there's no disputing? The reason why the latter may be worthwhile for community members to consider is because things like smart contract bugs, exploits, things like that are not subject currently in the covenant to disputable voting. And the reason being is that, as we talked about probably earlier in this discussion, there is a benefit to speed. And so avoiding the ability to sort of keep appealing in Celeste and keep disputing the proposal actually harms the community. So the community should have to consider, or at least make a decision one way or the other, is DAO Treasury decisions going to be a disputable voting, or is it not? Is there some consistent rule that can be applied? I don't have an answer for that. This is just stuff the community needs to think about. Next, going down into investment issues, there's an issue of exactly what should the DAO Treasury invest in if it does decide to invest. So obviously there's stablecoin investments, which carry probably the least amount of risk. this would probably be akin to sort of like, I don't know, old school bond investments. But it also depends on what network we're talking about, because that can be done on Ethereum. It can be done on the XDAI network. Obviously, we could do liquidity provider investments. Those are more complicated. Those tend to suffer from their own set of issues, but they can provide relatively outsized gains, which again, the community should consider. You know, there's upsides to that because the purpose of TEC is to provide grants. Then the issue is going to obviously revolve around the more money that the DAO has, the more grants it can be given. So it is directly relevant to sort of the purpose. On the flip side, there's a lot of risk, right? I mean, a permanent loss is a real thing. And so a bad choice on being a liquidity provider can end up, being very harmful to the purpose of the DAO. There's also custodial options. There's no reason why anything has to be kept in DeFi. It can be moved to other places. Okay. Go ahead.
No, just jumping on that. I was also just thinking about like arm's length transactions. Whoever is sort of managing Treasury, I was just thinking it should be.
Absolutely. And in fact, I get into it a little bit later. That's a major issue.
Yeah. Not to pick on Shib,
it's a major. It is a 100% major issue. And I'm a spoiler alert because we'll get into the document in a minute or two. But no, I think it's right that conflicts need to. And again, here it's going to be probably an issue of self-reporting because I don't know how else we do it. But part of the issue is going to obviously be, in an ideal world, someone would say, hey, look, I'm an owner of Sushi Coin. So if I make a recommendation that the stablecoin rates on the XDAI sushi bento box is really awesome right now, and it's like 30% to be a liquidity provider between stablecoins. So like, USDC and maybe XDAI or something. So obviously you have no impermanent loss, or at least very little impermanent loss because they're always pegged at $1. But people need to go back and forth between those tokens. So they need liquidity between those two stable coins. So the interest is like 30% plus you earn, some amount of X sushi. I should have to tell the community that I have a financial interest in that because I like sushi and I have a lot of money in sushi. If someone has a lot of money in agave, if someone has a lot of money in honey, or any of the tokens that kind of operate in one hive, then people need to talk about that. Because again, just from like in an ideal world, people would make informed decisions. And part of that informed decision is understanding the motivations of the people who are supporting a proposal and putting it forward. So if I'm putting forward a proposal that impacts my interests outside of TEC, I should tell people. The problem is going to be the mechanism for how to do that, right? So that's going to be the harder issue. Yes, I think everyone agrees with that. I don't think we get any pushback on that. I think everyone in the community would probably agree on that. How do you enforce that is the really hard part.
Well, my initial thought, I just want to bounce this off you, is like, do we have a form when you're making a proposal? And I think there you could fix it through a form where you're saying, what's your proposal? What's your amount? You make these different fields, and one field is, any conflict of interest. You could have a little bit of, tiny guide, any disclosures you need to make, I mean, do they have to give identity when they make a proposal, or is it going to just be like, Ethereum address? I mean, these are the type of things you can set forth in the format of the proposal mechanism that then would filter into the whatever then platform it's going to sit on. And that would be how I would approach it.
No, that looks like, and I don't mean this in a bad way, though it's going to sound like it is. That sounds like how it works in the real world, right? If you are, and I say real world, people get offended, but I mean that in the meat space, because a lot of stuff is self-reporting, right? And then eventually, if someone thinks there's a problem, then they start really digging into it. and then they go and look. So I think that's a great way, and something I'll probably go post in one of the working groups is we should think about a field that talks about conflicts, and maybe even have a document that says, hey, look, if you think you have a conflict, we should err on the side of telling the community about that potential conflict, and then letting the community decide whether or not that matters or not. Because they may decide it doesn't, right? If I'm making a proposal to put money on sushi and I own $500 of sushi, people may say, yeah, that's technically a conflict, but not one that's a big deal.
Yeah.
That
You can make a threshold. You can make a threshold.
Yeah,
as well.
you could. All those things are potential, and I think those things are all legitimate and real, because the ability for people to, we've seen in this space, the ability for people to shill to protect their own bags is real, and we want people to, if we want people to do the right thing, we need to give them the ability to do the right thing, and putting something on a proposal that says, hey, look, these are my conflicts or my potential conflicts, and then letting the community decide whether or not to follow up with additional questions is up to them.
Yeah, and also on top of that, I think just a form is a good way just to structure the proposals so that there's a consistency in the format, as well as if it's disputed, you have sort of a set of affirmations that one's made on that document. And the more, not to make it overly burdensome and highly bureaucratic, it's just that, what needs to be said before a proposal, as I said, to help the information of the community, but also to have a documented record of what that person is claiming. So
Absolutely. So let's when we get down to that, which is a little bit further down in the outline, I think at that point we should just refer back to this conversation, because I think we kind of covered really the major issues there, because I think that's 100% right. All right, so we obviously have custodial options, things like BlockFi, Lend. New products are coming on the market constantly. Coinbase, Binance, they all provide the ability to move money there. The problem with custodial options is I'm not aware of a DAO going to be able to do anything with them. So unless things change, there's no way for a DAO to sort of engage with a company like BlockFi, because there's no sort of legal existence for the DAO that BlockFi recognizes at this point. So
really, because if it's a Swiss associate, can it act on behalf as a Swiss association?
So I think there'll be a debate, and I could be wrong here. The Swiss association is right now in effect for the people that were hatchers. But when the DAO goes live and upgrades to the commons, I don't know if it's necessarily a Swiss association there, because members of the DAO that come in are not going to be members of the Swiss association. They might be, but they might not be. So
wasn't that in the bonding curve question, though, that it was still, because you set Swiss law, you set the same jurisdiction, but I see, but there's a distinction between those token holders. How will that be really practically work? I mean,
we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, but what's the benefit of doing it that way? I can see making two rings, right? But I'm just curious what your thought is on that.
No, sorry, Ivy, you had something too, right?
I just want to say that as far as I know, once we launch the DAO, they don't have to be a trusted seed member, Swiss Association member, if they want to buy TEC.
Right. So
how it worked. The DAO itself. So what was incorporated in the Swiss Association? Just the trusted seed.
Yeah. So the hatch was arguably the Swiss Association, and the members of the hatchers were members of the Swiss Association.
Yeah.
But even in that regard, it's going to be difficult. I just think custodial options, although they're a thing, are going to require an additional step to be viable for a DAO at this point in time, especially if the custodial option operates in America. Because then the only, go ahead.
No, yeah. Sorry, I totally can see that where you're going with that. I was thinking more like on the initial question, which was like when people, because when you bought into the hatch, you had to then click on that box that said you confirm or whatever you agree to the terms of Swiss Association, and that's what was binding and then captured in that. But you're not saying so. So the bonding curve won't have that same because it's sort of just going to be very decentralized. But then even if it's decentralized, I mean, you don't know the users, but wouldn't there be a benefit to having the legally wrapped as a Swiss association?
Potentially, but then the only way to get people to, I think there's a high level of complication with that. So when we were going through the hatch and people had not yet joined the trusted seed, there was a big effort to go and like find the people and contact them and make sure they joined the trusted seed before the hatch happened. That's the same effort that would have to be made to keep the DAO itself kind of wrapped that way.
Really?
And
because
I just don't.
Thought it would work. I thought it would work more. My understanding was when you create these legally wrapped DAOs, you're just referring to like the token holders, and you sort of give your params maybe like in those incorporation documents or association documents, whatever, and then that is sort of what, or even to the decision, you sort of make it referential, like a Ricardian contract, or a Ricardian association, and that but then defining the scope of the DAO is sort of still the boundaries of that is the association, but without, you're right, because it can change, it's dynamic, right? It could change every second, the composition of the members and but my understanding is the way they were setting these up, like even when I was watching the Wyoming legislation, was just that it was supposed to allow for these very fluid entities, but whoever's holding it at any point in time is seen as the members of that, LLC in Wyoming or the Swiss Association in Switzerland.
It's one of the issues with without kind of getting bogged down in it. It's like with the Wyoming law, there's a set number, there's a high limit on how many people can be a member of the DAO.
Yeah, because it's very prescriptive. I thought it was very overly prescriptive.
And that's because LLCs have that same prescription, right? And so that's not an option. That's not, it's in itself probably a realistic option.
What is the number?
I think in Wyoming it's maybe 100. I could be wrong. It may be higher, but it's not higher by an order of magnitude. So I may be off by 50%, but I won't be off by 10 times.
Less than 500.
Oh, almost certainly less than 500. And
already we have 300 people, so we went
correct. And yeah, there's additional sort of, it's more burdensome than just having an LLC in Wyoming. It's a great start. I think it's an awesome start, and Governor Dow is doing it. They converted from a Delaware LLC into the Wyoming DAO. They're doing proof of existence to identify the members of the DAO so that they're able to do their reporting as required. It is awesome. It's just, I don't think, consistent with what TEC is doing, and it just isn't. And that's the closest thing we've got to something in the US. So there just isn't a yet. Now, we may see that in a year, there'll be something awesome and better and smarter. And we'll say, hey, look, we should transition into this. And that'll be great if that happens. Or not. Maybe people will hate it. Okay, so back to the document. So just Griff, just to catch you kind of up to where we are right now. We looked at the augmented curve document, and basically we're just waiting for the params to finish up. And then we'll fill in the last bits of data there. Otherwise, everything is done there. Yeah, it's awesome, and the params parties look like they're going along swimmingly. We took a look at a short document that I'll post after the meeting today that deals with third-party applications and people's control over their contributions there, and their ability to sort of take down their comments should they want to. And this last document we're looking at is basically just the beginnings of an outline for Treasury management. And it's not rules, it's just literally things people should be thinking about before those decisions get made. And this is super, super early in the process. And so it is just a jumping off point. So the last here in this section was insurance options, which obviously a lot of DAOs are considering. I think the insurance is really interesting, but obviously there needs to be a market for what it is you are exactly trying to insure. So, I highly, highly doubt that anything on, say, like Nexus, Mutual, or anything like that is going to have anything for the tech token. But if there is stuff that's, say, put in other tokens for Treasury management, it's at least something to think about, making sure that there is some insurance protection. I don't think it has to be done, but it's at least something community members should think about. The community should have to, if they want to invest, have to consider how much of the Treasury should be invested. So if you do too little, it's not worth the effort. And that's not just, gas costs if you're doing stuff on Ethereum. Obviously, if you're on XDAI, you don't have as much of a concern about that, but there's less liquidity there, so you don't usually see really great rates, unless you're suffering from really bad impermanent loss, in which case then the rates are great, but then the impermanent loss is like really, really rough. So if you put too little of the Treasury into outside investments, then the issue is going to be it just isn't worth the effort or the time or going back and forth on voting. And of course, if you do too much, then you risk the entire project, right? You can't give out a bunch of grants if 90% of the money is tied up in Treasury management. So the community will have to find sort of a happy medium between, if they decide to invest, between putting enough money there that it is useful for the DAO, but at the same time not so much that it limits the ability for the DAO to fulfill its mission. Community members should think about how fast money is cycled back into the Treasury. So obviously the quicker money is harvested and returned, the sooner it can be used to fund TEC. However, some protocols reward money for how that it's held in the protocol for a longer period of time. So again, there'll just be a tension between how fast you in the community want to make decisions to cycle money back into the Treasury. There's obviously benefits to doing it quickly, there's benefits to holding on to it, and there's downsides to both. This kind of plays in with what we talked about earlier with proposals, but there's an argument that DAO proposals should be specific about the timeframes for harvesting. So for example, if proposal 1 invests $20,000 in HoneySwap liquidity mining, with harvesting occurring every 1 month, and the principal removed, say, after 6 months, then the upside is that the community has an idea of how long things are being tied up. And so it's one of those things we talked about earlier, in proposals, maybe talking about any conflicts of interest and at least attesting to any conflicts. This is another thing that I think helps a lot when dealing with Treasury proposals, is saying, how long is the money going to be tied up? Because that affects people's decision, or it should affect people's decisions. If you're going to put $20,000 and say, look, we're not touching it for a year, that's much more, that's a bigger encumbrance than sitting back and saying, well, look, we'll do it for 3 months or 6 months. So it's just something for the community to consider.
Are you going to make this into a forum post?
Probably. I'd like to kind of have people see it in this form first. Sure. But just because I don't think I'm I'd like to hear other people's thoughts.
Did you see the initial buy proposal and the thoughts on this? So one thing that we're going to do, because the DAO itself doesn't collectively hold any funds, right?
Right.
in the initial design. And that sucks, right? We should have some TEC in our back pocket. That's what DAOs govern their own tokens sometimes, right?
Right.
So we're actually going to, there was been a whole debate for about a month and a half around treasury management and how we manage this fund. So we're actually going to take $250K out of the hatch funds and make an initial buy into the bonding curve. Therefore, getting the cheapest amount of the cheapest value of TEC that will be possible during the token freeze, right? Because the price literally can't be lower than it is at launch because no one can sell their tokens. So the DAO itself will then hold that TEC. 80, I think like 30% of it is going to the reward system. So they'll use TEC to like pay people out. And the rest will actually be held back for two purposes: liquidity, like exchange with other groups.
Right.
So making an exchange of giving some TEC tokens for honey tokens and then making a TEC honey pool, right? And then asking one hive to also make a TEC honey pool. And then we share and hold that liquidity. So a lot of this is super relevant for that action. And the other would be to sell TEC at a discount to strategic partners, but have them send the money straight to the common pool for funding.
Right.
So they buy it with WrappedX, but they don't buy it through the bonding curve. They buy it from us, and then they send money straight to the conviction voting pool. And then effectively the DAO makes a little bit of a profit off of that because we bought cheap tokens before anyone else did and are selling them later for at an elevated price.
But
how would you describe that second option? Like, I just want to make sure I describe it correctly. How would you describe it?
Strategic partnerships.
Yeah, it'd be good there to like have the criteria upon which we make the strategic partnerships. Like, what's the minimum eligibility? So some sort of, and then on the reserve, I guess that's like a reserve mechanism, or how you would, because it's the reserves, right? You're thinking about taking the reserves and then propping up the token at the initial at the initial part of the bonding curve to sort of support it.
Creating we want to it's not about supporting the bonding curve because the bonding curve has all the support it needs, but it's more about participating in a secondary market as the DAO itself so that we can end up holding liquidity. Have you seen the Olympus DAO stuff? Like Olympus DAO, instead of doing yield farming or liquidity mining, it's like that's like renting liquidity. And if you instead trade TEC tokens for liquidity, then you're buying liquidity, and it's like buying a house instead of renting an apartment. So it's a really nice idea for DAOs to do. But we're at the top of the hour, so it's so bad.
Yeah. I just want to finish one thing, and then Griff, I'll reach out to you on the best place to post this and get people's thoughts. Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about before we end, because we're at the top of the hour, is here's a section on conflicts of interest. And this dovetails with what we talked about earlier in the conversation. Insofar as I do think the community should consider when dealing with any treasury proposals that a best practices would be radical transparency. So just telling people, hey, I'm recommending sushi, but I hold sushi. I just added this section, the buy-in from Treasury into the ABC, and then strategic partnerships. And then this last section is basically reporting issues, which is something I think every DAO needs to be seriously considering, which is having something on the dashboard that makes clear to token holders. And I don't know the best way to do it. I'm just talking about it at a very high level. But basically what their share of any DAO profits are. Because it would help when making reports to our various tax authorities that we are consistent and clear about what it is people have made. And obviously with the Treasury, because money could be made from mining, liquidity, whatever, the ability to say, hey, this token has generated X amount of profit would need to be reported. That's it, guys. We're at the top of the hour. I'm going to post this. I will talk with Griff about posting. Please, I will post this in Legal 2. Make edits, make comments, do everything. And we will keep going through the params, and we're going to be pretty close to the end of them in a week or two. So everyone have a really good weekend, and I will see everyone at the next meeting.
See you.
Thank you so much, Sean.
Thanks, Sean.
No problem. Take care, guys.